You are listening to This is Oklahoma, hosted by Mike Hearn, telling stories of Oklahomans and those that have made it their home.
This podcast is presented by the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, who have been telling Oklahoma's story through its people since 1927. Follow them online at oklahomahof.com, and then definitely follow them on Instagram for all the information that you need, because I'm sure that's where you follow us as well, at oklahomahof. Let's get into today's episode. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma. Mike Keune here, your host, back with another episode. James Helton is on the podcast with me today to tell you about all the stuff that he's done up until now. I'm really excited. Thanks to Shannon for putting us together and referring another guest. For those people listening, that's how I get guests. It's usually by referrals from friends of people who have awesome stories. So appreciate you coming on the podcast. Before we dive into everything, I guess we'll dive into the history, give everyone a little bit of context. Who are you and what do you do?
As you said, my name is James Helton. I am a hairdresser who lives here in Oklahoma City. I've been in Oklahoma for probably since '86. I've been here twice. Once from like 81 to 82, 83. And then from 86 to now. Yeah. So I'm a hairdresser. I've been a hairdresser for 30 years. I also work for a product brand that I do. Basically, the layman is I do adult learning for them. Do corporate training, adult learning, that sort of thing. So that's about it. I stand behind the chair 4 days a week and do programs for them. Obviously now in this particular time, a lot of our stuff has gone from in-person to digital, but we do quite a bit of that as well. So, I've had classes the last 3 of the 4 Mondays that I've had this. So I'm actually in the digital world almost busier this year than I was at this time last year before the big breakdown. Yeah. So
crazy times. We are almost a year in, right? It was like March something. Almost
yes.
What? Like where?
Into March.
Yeah, almost a year. So you say you came to Oklahoma twice. Where were you before that? Like, where'd you grow up?
I was born on the Southeast Gulf Coast. I am from a region of the Southeast Gulf Coast called the Alamis region, which is right on the state line of Alabama and Mississippi. Probably in one direction, hour and 45 minutes from the coast. The other direction, probably another hour and 45 minutes. Yeah. Just depends on if you want to be on the coast in Mobile or if you want to be on the coast in Pascagoula, Mississippi, right? So, oil field brought us out here the first time. Then the oil field also took us away from here the first time. And my dad went back to work offshore. Yeah. And he kind of had an accident on the rig, almost lost an eye. And then my mom wasn't quite seeing the salary that she had hoped to see being a graduate from the University of Oklahoma, that sort of thing. And a job she had out here prior to us moving away just kept insisting on her coming back. And kind of after my dad's injury, I think they kind of, sit down and put things back pen to paper again. Yeah. And they figured that would make a greater go back in Oklahoma. Sure. And little did we know at the time he was actually, being kids, he was looking at a career change. So he would eventually go from being an offshore roughneck to driving a tractor trailer, which he, I think, officially just quit doing that yesterday.
Amazing. That's awesome. Yeah.
So he was a truck driver from the time that I was middle of my junior year in high school, so early 87. Yeah. Until yesterday.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So the past few years he's been kind of driving off and on,
Yeah,
enough
picking
to
up
still,
jobs here and there.
Yeah. But nothing fantastic. And he decided yesterday that was going to be it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, good for him. That's awesome.
Right?
Yeah. What a day to have it for people listening and watching. We're currently recording on what is probably 2 days before we get the biggest snow that apparently Oklahoma has ever seen, if you listen to the news. So when this goes out, we will see if we've had the biggest snow that everyone else has ever seen. Right now it's like, don't leave your house. The roads are terrible. Well, stay in don't be an idiot and you'll be okay.
Right.
So what's like... So growing up, like, where does, like, hairdressing get into it then? Because, like, growing up and all that stuff, like, are you just into it from day one, or was it more of like a cultural thing that you're into as, and hairdressing is just a part of the culture that you grew up in?
So it is actually probably the antithesis of how I grew up. Being a child from the South, guys weren't hairdressers very often. They were barbers.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. That line was drawn pretty definitively. And I mean, I was kind of loosely infatuated with my barber as a young man, because he very much looked like the spitting image of Kenny Rogers from the 70s, that sort of thing. He was cool. He always, he seemed to do what he wanted,
right.
That sort of deal. And so apart from that, my parents were, we grew up in a rural community. They were from rural Mississippi. So I kind of grew up loosely kind of on a small, like, just house-sustaining farm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We had pigs, we had chickens, we had an acre and a half of garden, dogs, cats, whatever. But unlike my parents, I found rock and roll, like, early. Like, my mom liked Elvis and, that sort of thing, but I got into rock and roll in, like, the second grade. Yeah. And my parents were like, what has happened? You know what I mean? What has happened? Because, now I got, I'm a second grader. Right. And the story about that is, when I was in second grade, you had afternoon recess, right? And afternoon recess, I went to a consolidated school, which means that we had K through 8. Okay. All right. Kindergarten was in an annex building. 1 through 4 was in one wing. 5 through 8 was in another. So, and there was a big gymnasium, nice hardwood floors. I mean, it was crazy. And in afternoon recess, you could go to the gymnasium and for 10 cents, you could either get a fudgesicle, a chocolate milk, or a soda. So I walk into the gymnasium one day, and obviously the 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade kids worked that concession stand. And this girl was playing, like, this music on her radio, and I was like, what is that? Yeah. And she was, like I said, I'm second grade. She's 8th grade. She's like, oh, little man, that's Kiss. Have you never heard that? And I was like, no. And then within like a week, I had convinced my grandmother to buy my first rock and roll record for me. And then, you got Kiss posters all over the wall. And then by the time we moved to Oklahoma, I was definitely into, all kinds of other music and, so culture, yes. Yeah. Like my culture, going into high school, especially in Oklahoma, I found like an unwitting band of musicians and artists in Purcell, Oklahoma, which is where I graduated high school from. So, they play guitar, they play drums and whatnot. And we graduate high school, still, hair's never a thing, but I played guitar, and whatnot. And so we get out of school. I go to OU for a year. I absolutely hated college. I didn't really care for the culture. Again, what I mean? It's a culture thing. And a buddy of mine that I was working with, I was working a crappy job. I was in a warehouse working the night shift. It almost sounds like my uncle walked, 50 miles to school uphill and still barefoot. Yeah. But I was literally working the night shift in a warehouse loading semis. and inside a freezer. So I was working in frozen,
Yeah.
And my buddy that I graduated high school with, he was like, hey, man, he was like, I know that, I know you really don't want to go to college for 4 years. And I'm like, well, no, that's not. I mean, I'm 19. You know what I mean? And I'm like, no, that doesn't sound fun. He was like, have you ever considered doing hair? And I was like, no.
Like, what are you trying to say about me?
Right. It was
almost an
kind
insult.
of coming from that, from that very country culture, and that sort of thing. I was like, no. And he was like, no, man. No, listen. Yeah. He was like, you get to work when you want, essentially, make your own hours, which we all sooner or later very soon learn that that's a fallacy.
Because if you run your own business, there is no days off.
Yeah. So you work when your clients say you work, and I'm sure that you have the same thing. You know, he's like, but you get to wear your hair the way you want, you get to wear clothes the way you want, and I was like, huh, all right,
yeah,
So he was like, but there's 2 schools here in town. This was in Norman, Oklahoma. He's like, one school is very strict, and then the other school is, which is where I'm going. He was telling the story. That's where I'm going. They're a little more relaxed, that sort of thing. So me knowing myself at that time enough to know, I kind of needed, if I was going to go to school for something, I needed to go someplace where I was almost afraid not to go.
Gotcha.
Like they set such a culture that like you were afraid to no-show.
You needed strict.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because I was kind of, I was 19. I was kind of all over the place. I really didn't know what I would have loved to have been a musician, but I really, hated. I love the idea more than I love the practice.
The lifestyle and the way it looks. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I agree with you.
But so there was that element to it. So in hairdressing, you might say it was the actual culture that attracted me in the beginning. I had no idea if I could cut hair. As a matter of fact, when I first started cutting hair, it was extraordinarily difficult. A very common thing you see hairdressers do is it's what we call palming your shears, right? It's where you hold the shears and the comb in the same hand. Sure. You comb, you section the hair off, you pull it down, you move your comb from your dominant hand to your recessive hand, and then you make the cut. I couldn't do even that. And because I went to the stricter school, one of the things that I did not know was that this school, people were coming to from states away.
Wow. Okay.
So I was getting ready to, unbeknownst to myself, go to school with people that had grown up in hair salons, had parents that were hairdressers, that had wanted to be a hairdresser since they
had swept hair since they were 12, like the whole deal.
And here I am, like I thought it would be kind of cool.
Yeah, like what do I do with this hand and this hand?
Right. And my instructor for hair design was super patient. But at like day 5, he just comes over and says, he's like, and this was a Friday. He was like, I don't know what you have to do to be able to do this. Yeah. But if you can't do this, then you can't do this. And I was like, all right. So I kind of went home that weekend and worked on it. But it was just it was the simplest and dumbest thing to not be able to do. But, I worked on it all weekend, kind of carried shears and a comb around with me for a bit to kind of get the feeling of that. Yeah. And then came back on Monday or on Tuesday, and it was a little bit different. Yeah. It was a little bit of a different world. So that's kind of the the background of what got me into hairdressing in the first place, and kind of where that came from. Side note, the guy that introduced me to the hair business lives in Seattle now. He plays in a band still. He's got a wife and kids and whatnot, but he was having memory trouble. He's losing long-term memory as opposed to
the opposite. There's the dementia side of things, which is the short-term
memory.
Right?
So he's losing long-term memories, and we like talk once a week or so, and I basically kind of tell him stories.
Yeah.
About
this
when
is what
we
did or whatever.
Right. And he sent me the brand I work for, which is Keune Hair Cosmetics. We just had a big virtual show this past Monday, was a week ago. And it obviously went out on social media, that sort of thing. And he hits me up. He's like, hey, it's good to see you, out there doing the thing. And like on stage, like, kind of you wanted to, blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, here's the thing. And kind of just told him the story that I told you. And though we weren't face to face, you could kind of tell that even through the written word, that he was kind of taken aback that, he had that kind of impact, and that's kind of where it all started from, really.
Yeah. So. That's amazing. What was like when you get into hair school? What is like the extent of like your like personal kind of fashion? Was it following the rock and roll stuff? Did you have long hair as well?
I was growing my hair out.
Yeah.
Again, my father was very much a like, boys have short hair, that kind of thing. Like, no son of mine, that whole mentality. Yeah. So I started hair school, started being able to pay for my own hair services, which were, by students at that point. Just do each other's hair.
Right. Not short back and sides with a razor and stuff. And
right.
Military
stuff. So we, I started growing my hair out, then start really getting into, this was early, like, I think I graduated beauty school in 91.
Okay.
So I started in April of 90, and I think I graduated in June of 91.
Yeah.
So it was that kind of fashion, like where we were getting out of, hairband stuff into new wave, like new wave again with like Information Society and REM and stuff like that, and then moving into what would eventually be like grunge and a resurfacing of rock and roll, essentially, at that point. So, but yeah, I kind of started to gravitate, even more so towards the music side of things.
Sure.
And then by the time I'm, mid 90s, which is, I think I met Shannon in 93, I was, flannel shirt and shorts and long johns and combat boots and long hair.
Yeah.
I hadn't started getting tattooed yet, but that was very soon to
on
come
the agenda.
To pass.
Yeah. So you said you graduated in 91.
Yep.
From hair school. Where do you go then? Do you like leave the state? Is that?
No, I actually stayed in Oklahoma. I worked very unsuccessfully for 2 years. One of the things they don't tell you in beauty school let me back up. Our beauty school owner actually told us exactly what to do, and nobody wanted to listen. Yeah. So to set that straight. So I got out. I wanted to go into booth rental, try to build a business that way. Norman is kind of like a very forward small town.
Sure.
Especially when all the students leave. So you kind of have the people that grew up there, and then you have the rest of the town, right? And I kind of found it very difficult not being a Norman native, not really being an Oklahoma native. I hadn't been a resident of Oklahoma at that time, but probably 7 or 8 years. And so I found it difficult to build business, and in Norman then, and it's even worse now. I mean, you throw a rock and hit a hair joint somewhere, right? So I'm 2 years in. My parents are breathing down my neck. Like, you need to figure out what you're doing.
Yeah.
You need to call the ball at some point. So I was looking straight down the barrel of a fortuitous career at Little Caesars. And I was on my last day at this salon, not having the slightest idea what I was going to do other than go to work at Little Caesars after I left there. And this lady from Supercuts called the salon, or the phone starts ringing, and the salon owner's like, "Hey, can you grab that before you leave?" I'm like, yeah, because I was going to lunch and I was like, maybe I will come back, maybe I won't. I mean, who knows what's going to happen right now?
Right.
So
23 at this point, just like,
right. I was like,
whatever.
you know, who the hell knows what's going to happen today?
Yeah.
You know, I pick up the phone, and this lady on the other end, she's like, "Hey, this is James Helton." I'm like, "Yeah, why? Who wants to know?
What have I done?
Right, what have I done now?" So she was like, "Hey, this is, my name is Christy. I work for Supercuts. I just started here at the store in Norman. I was going through a drawer of old applications. My assistant manager says he knows you somehow, and I was wanting to know if you'd be interested in coming to talk to me." And I was like, "Well, who's your assistant?"
Right. Yeah.
Like,
I don't want to go work for someone who I don't actually like.
I'm like, I don't know a lot of people around here, but all right. So, my list of known hairdressers was relatively short at that point. So she told me, and I was like, in my head, I'm like, I don't know that guy.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, can I come? I'll come talk to you. Yeah. So I go talk to her. I had a relatively poor attitude about it. It just didn't seem like something I wanted to do. And come to find out, the guy that said he knew me had seen me walk into the school to pick up my transcript. And he asked somebody who I was. And that's the only basis for knowing me that he had.
He knows who you are.
Right. He knows who I am. He did not know me.
Right. Big difference.
Right. So we do that whole thing. We talk. Of course. After that, I was like, "Well, can I let you know?" Now, keep in mind, I have nothing going on, and I'm like, "Can I let you know?"
Not like biting a hand off to say, yes, I'll take it up right now.
Right, no.
Don't care what the deal is. I want to go.
So I go home and I call my mom. And she was like, well, I mean, you have a license. It'd be cool if you did something with it. And I'm like...
I'm picturing the look on your mom's face and she's saying this to you. It's like, yeah, I mean, sarcastically, you'd be like...
Right, it would be nice if you could use that. I'm like, oh, okay. So I take the job.
Yeah.
Right? I work for them for 4 years. Make it into management. I ended up, I ended up living in Louisville, Kentucky for a year and made some really good friends down there. While I was there, decided like, okay, this is not what I want to do for the rest. I don't want to retire from here. So I moved back to Oklahoma. My parents were super pissed off because I quit a job.
Because that is your career, and in their eyes, it is a solid, long-term 50, 40
I quit
year
a job
career.
that I didn't like for no job at all.
Not like, hey, I've got a job lined up.
Right. No.
Yeah.
So I'm sleeping on my buddy's couch. I go to work as an assistant in a hair salon that was coincidentally owned. Another longer story, but it was coincidentally owned by the ex-wife of the owner of the beauty school I went to.
Okay. Oklahoma's a small world, isn't it?
Right. So I was like, wow, all right. So I was her assistant for about a year while I was trying to build clientele, which is, So that's kind of... I made a go of that. I was going to make a go of it, or literally it seemed like I was going to die trying. Ended up working there for 2 years. Moved into a small shop of my own that was like 700 square feet to do what I wanted to do. Which even then I was like, what do I want to do?
Right.
As far as, how the shop looked and all this kind of stuff. But it was very rock and roll, very, more rockabilly by that time, because rockabilly was somehow more palatable than just straight rock and roll.
Sure.
It was almost publicly safe. So, and then somewhere around, I did that from 99 to 07. In 07, one of my sales reps came about and basically asked if he knew I'd been interested in doing education. Education at that point in time in Oklahoma was a little difficult because of the, I guess you could say, concentration of brands that were being used and available and that sort of thing. So he was like, I just started using Keune's product. Keune was new for this part of the country. Nobody had ever heard of it. So he was like, I know you're interested in education. And if education is something you want to do, now I believe now's the time to make your move.
Yeah.
I was like, okay. This was in January. And he said, he was like, you have to fly to Atlanta. You have to make 2 trips to Atlanta, Georgia. You have to put yourself up in a hotel. You have to pay your way. And I'm like, God dang. This
is a lot to invest in myself again.
That's a big ask.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, going back to school and all the rest of it.
And I'm like, all right. It was two 4-day segments.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right. I was like, that's probably going, this was in January. I said, I'll probably have it to where I can do it probably by September, October. Because you're looking at probably $2,000, $3,000 to invest in that.
Yeah.
And he was like, whoa, what's the holdup? I said, well, sir, it's dollars.
Yeah.
What's the holdup for anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm time wealthy.
Yeah. All the time in the world.
I'm not cash wealthy at this particular moment. Right. So he was like, well, what if we could address the cash flow problem? I was like, well, then whenever you're ready.
Yeah. I can go tomorrow if you need me to.
Right.
Yeah.
So he talked to the head of the distributorship that handles the product locally here in Oklahoma, which is now grown to be one of the largest independent distributors in the country.
Wow.
And he comes back and he was like, they'll sponsor you. But, you kind of have to make a promise of, staying with it for a couple of years, that sort of thing. Or you're going to have to, pay some dollars back. And I was like, that's not a problem, So I hit the ground running. Obviously, he used me quite a bit for classes and salon programs and that sort of thing. And I stayed with that part of it for probably 9 years. I was just doing local classes. I was probably doing about 30 programs a year at my highest, 30 to 31. And I was really interested in putting together a men's program, men's cutting program. Men's hair cutting was really starting to push its way into the market and be what it is now, right? And this was like probably 4 or 5 years ago. And at that time, it seemed like I was beating my head against the wall. Like I wasn't getting an audience with the people that were in control of things at that time. And I was on my way back from actually Springfield, Missouri, and we get an email that, the creative director had resigned, blah, blah, blah. And I was both really irritated. And I was like, you know what? There's nobody between me and the man at this point. So I sent the CEO an email. I was like, look, man, I'm not sure how we go about this. And if this is inappropriate, I do apologize. Yeah. But here's what I'm thinking and why. And literally less than 24 hours, he had sent a response back. He was like, I 100% agree with you. And as you can imagine, I'm a little short-staffed at the moment. So as soon as I get this rectified, I'll have somebody get a hold of you.
Yeah.
So about 3 months, about 90 days later, a gentleman who now does a podcast called Shop Talk, his name is Chris Sulame. Chris hits me up. He's like, hey, buddy, Andy tells me, which Andy Biazzi was the CEO or CFO at the time. He's like, Andy tells me you're interested in doing a men's program. I'm like, yeah, And he was like, well, I'm going to send you some formats over and see what you can make of them. Little did he know that in the 9 years I'd been doing this, I was only allowed to teach like basic color classes and product knowledge classes, right? However, I had worked every angle on the basic color class at that point.
Right.
So I had written several programs just on my own, not really knowing if it was right or wrong or the best way to do it or whatever. And I sat down with it and started kind of looking through the actual format and looked at that and was like, okay. So I sent it back to him the next day and I was like, what do you think about that? And he was like, oh, okay. So can you put those cuts, can you do those on a mannequin head and send me the pictures? I'm like, yeah, sure. No big deal. So that's kind of how that got into play. And then, I now am I'm the creative design ambassador for Keune North America. I'm one of 3 salaried artists. Most of the other artists are either on some sort of retainer or they're 1099, that sort of deal.
Yeah, project-based kind of
thing.
Right.
Project-based, fee-based, if you will. And I got brought on as a salaried corporate employee in 2019, February of 2019. And one of my, the main thing I do currently is I'm a part of the new hire training team. I'm a part of their show team. I'm a part of their academy team. And I work with the technical ambassador and the senior creative design ambassador, as well as the VP of education and shows, to produce content.
Wow.
For, the field.
Yeah.
Sometimes social media. We've been really doing a lot of, social media content production at this point.
Because it's endless, isn't it? It's never ending.
I mean, it's never ending.
Produce enough.
The options, the possibilities, the ways it can be done is just, I would have never imagined in March of 2020 what could be done with InShot. With, the on your phone video editing program. So, and being able to shoot most of your content from your phone. I mean, I've invested in a mid to low level, like digital webcam type thing now. But I mean, we've done most of what we've done up to now with our phones and whatnot. Yeah. So, but, that's kind of the hair part of it, moving into, working with Keune and that sort of thing. So, but yeah.
So when it's suggested that the next move for you is to go into teaching, what is your initial reaction at that point? Did you ever see yourself as a teacher? Do you kind of have a passion for teaching and love teaching? Or was this just, or was it a shock and you kind of had a different experience to it?
So the answer to both of those questions is probably yes. I never really thought too much about teaching because I don't like to view things as I'm going to teach you something. That almost seems to me like a form of retribution.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
However, obviously you can easily tell I don't mind sharing things. So when education came about, I looked at it as like if you already had a bachelor's degree, being able to go to graduate school. Because to me, one of the things that you do learn in leadership of all sorts, doesn't matter, is if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Yeah.
Right. So I kind of felt that I had taken myself as far as I could take myself, reading magazines, just going to hair classes, because I went to hair classes easily once a month sometimes, at least once a quarter, that kind of thing. And I would take the same classes like from particular facilitators over and over again, just to kind of like, all right, what did I miss from the last class, And so I really looked at it as an opportunity to elevate my skill set, because when you start working in education on this side of, in the beauty industry, you are working around artists that have elevated themselves to that particular point, right?
Yeah.
And some people that have been in education their whole lives, and product training and facilitation and all of that sort of thing. So I really saw it as more of an opportunity to further my own craft and my own skill set.
Yeah.
And just being able to share info, because you never know what you know.
Sure.
Until you have to share it with someone else.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You're right. You're like, hey, give a class on this. And you realize you're like, oh, I have to speak about this for 30 minutes, 10 minutes, half, whatever it is.
3
then
hours.
You realize, so you're like, oh, like, like I have a class coming up. Actually, I have to speak in March for PhotoCon. We're at Bedford's Camera right now, and they post a conference every year, and I have to speak. And I'm like, I need to go over a lot of things, right?
Right. And one of the, just not telling you anything, but one of my favorite quotes would be, if I realized that, what was the quote? Basically, if I'd known I'd had less time to speak, I would have spent more time preparing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, preparing for a 3-hour class is not near as hard as preparing for a 30-minute presentation. Sure. From my perspective.
Okay.
Yeah. Because when you start talking about a 30-minute presentation, you have 30 minutes. So if you intro yourself and you close that out, now you have 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you have to fill that 25 minutes with your concise points and that sort of thing, and not meander.
Straight to the point.
Right.
Yeah.
And still feel approachable, personable, touchable, not like you're standing behind a podium, that kind of thing. So yeah. But that's kind of why I got into education, really, is to make myself better.
Yeah.
And really, when I got out there, I got a lot of classes. Like, I had a lot of sales reps wanting to use me because they said that hairdressers understood me somehow or another. And how that particularly works, I had no idea. But to me, it was, how simple can you make it? And, and that's kind of how I see sharing information is breaking it down into its simplest form.
Yeah.
And when I started out teaching or facilitating, presenting hair color education, that's kind of how I tried to present it. Like, it's not complicated. You are complicating it.
Yeah.
The thing itself,
overthinking or whatever it is.
The thing itself is not a complicated mechanism.
Right.
It is. Now you have an endless array of options. But just like building a building or working on a car or whatever, there are mechanics to it. There are things that you do under certain circumstances to get a particular result. And I always, considered hair color at that time to be like one of those like flip books we had as kids, those adventure books, if you choose to go through the door, turn to page 25.
Yeah.
If you walk down the hall, keep reading, that kind of thing. So, but yeah. And, by the time I had gotten into education, I'd already spent some time, as, a member of a local chamber of commerce. Actually, what was at one point in time, the Bethany Chamber of Commerce that became the Northwest Chamber of Commerce, which is the commerce that serves Bethany where SMU is, I had served on their board of directors and that sort of thing for about 4 years up to that. So
What took you there?
that was a weird sort of thing.
Because I you go from here, right? You go from all this stuff that your story to get to where you are. The last thing I think about is you going into working for city and chamber of commerce and stuff, and like white collar like stuff, right? Like that doesn't seem to be on the agenda growing up.
This was the first time in my particular life that I went somewhere where I knew I was not going to be well received.
I can see that.
I intentionally went where I knew I was not going to be well received. I had a little hair shop, right? My first hair shop.
Yeah.
While all that's going on, this guy moves in next door to me. And he's a computer guy. He's a computer repair dude.
Where was it at?
It was over on 94th and Council.
Okay.
Like back off of Council on 94th, behind like that 7-Eleven, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So he had, he's a young guy, significantly younger than me. I was in my middle 30s. He was probably in his early 20s, and he's like, really hot to trot, wanting to get in there, wanting to get to business, all this, and wanted to be a businessman. And we kind of started, neighborly talking and whatnot. And he hits me up. He's like, have you ever thought about being a member of the Chamber of Commerce? And I'm like, look, man, I said, as much as I appreciate the thought, I said, those are not my people, and I am not theirs. Mm-hmm. And I said, when I lived in Norman, I went to a couple of chamber meetings because the salon, my first salon that I worked at, the owner was a chamber member. She was like, you need to go to these and hand out cards and blah, 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 blah. And that, sir, was the most unpleasant experience I have ever had in a public setting. So I'm like, no, brother, no. I'll help you in any way you want me to do it, but this I absolutely cannot abide. He's like, oh, man, all right, whatever. So about a month later, he comes over and he's like, hey, let's go to lunch. I'm like, cool,
yeah, all
right. Where we going? He's like, man, let's hit up Joe's Crab Shack down on Expressway. I'm like, all right, cool. He's like, I'll buy. I'm like, well, hell yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
So we go to Joe's Crab Shack and we're walking through, and I'm like looking at the back, and there's a group of people back there. Collared shirts, ties, side parts, that sort of thing. I'm like, where are we sitting? He's like, we're gonna sit back here in the garden room. I'm like,
set you right up.
Yeah. I look at him and he's like, man, just work with me on this. It's a free lunch. What do you care?
Right.
I'm like, all right, fine, whatever. So I sit and I listen to what they're saying, and this really Rubenesque, much louder speaking than me, if you can possibly imagine that. Fellow was the head of the show at that time.
Big tie as well.
Big tie,
yeah.
Big tie, big man, big tie, big voice, big glasses. He had big written all over him, and he was talking. And they, it was a chamber ambassadors meeting, which ambassadors, they go out and do ribbon cuttings. Yeah. They're the PR front to a chamber of commerce, and completely volunteer committee, that sort of thing. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking around the room, because that's kind of what I do. I'm a weirdo like that. I watch people. And we do the lunch thing, and I'm still speaking very illy of my friend at this time, at least mentally. And we're leaving, and I'm like, why? He was like, was that so bad?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, it wasn't bad, no, but those people don't like me. I can tell you right now, they don't like me. They're not going to like me.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I wish I could tell you that to know me is to love me, but in that circle of people, that's not going to be the case.
Right.
Brother, they're just not going to like me. And he was like, well, what if you join for just base membership of $200, and if in the end of 12 months you have not made your money back, and you work with me on this, I'll pay your next month's dues or I'll give you your money back. I was like, what do you want from me?
Yeah, I mean, you have to see this guy every day, right? He works next door to you, right? He's a neighbor, technically.
Right.
You can't get away from him.
So he's like, I was like, what do you want me to do? And he said, he was like, I don't have the people skill that you've got. He was like, you observe people on a level that I don't have that. And I want to be chairman of this organization someday, and I need someone like that to help me know who's being genuine, who's not being genuine, and kind of help me, circumnavigate the tar pits of this whole situation. And to me, that kind of almost brought like this weird game element to it. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I can play this game.
Right. So so that was that. I became a chamber ambassador, right? So I started going to these ambassadors meetings, community coffees, ribbon cuttings, blah, blah, blah. Still not getting a lot of joy out of people. Then the next thing you know, I am on he becomes the chairperson of the ambassadors committee. Then I'm the co-chair. And I express to the CEO at the time, I'm like, or my buddy expresses, he's like, we want to be on the board of directors. And this old dude kind of chuckles. And he was wanting to take the chamber in like a newer, bolder direction.
Yeah.
And I was like, he was like, you're not going to be a hard sell, but Mr. Helton here, that's going to be a tougher situation. He's like, our board of directors is pretty conservative, Mr. Helton. Like, yeah, I got that. Yeah. I was like, but here's the thing, man. I mean, you're wanting to go in new directions. You're wanting to push the envelope, and if you want to get out of, we are only a white-collar organization, what better person to have stand in front of you than a long-haired hippie such as myself
that sees people every day.
That sees people every day, that says that these people aren't these, stiff upper lip people that you have sold them to be. Much like I sold you myself.
Yeah.
And he was like, all right, well, we need to get you on a committee that reports to the board so that the board can see you in a non-threatening position. So he creates an events committee. He was like, you're going to be working with the events coordinator, blah, 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 blah. She and I didn't really get along, but I don't guess that mattered at that time. And we had been pushing to, as blasphemous as this was in that community, we've been pushing to take the annual banquet out of BFC. All right, that's Bethany First Church.
Yeah.
Right. And
which is the center of Bethany, just cultural, public, anything. The city stuff. I mean, it's BFC. Yeah. Talk about bubbles.
Right.
Yeah.
So we proposed the salaried events person and the chair of the events committee, which was me, proposes to the board that we would fare better if we had the annual banquet at the Waterford. So you're going from BFC, Bethany Free Church.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's free.
Yeah.
To the Waterford, which is an undertaking financially. And they were like, well, how are we going to pay for this? I said, I can almost guarantee you will have more attendance. You will have more paid attendance. And we will seek sponsorships of every particular conceivable level. I luckily happened to hit this on an election year.
Okay.
It was mayoral elections. It was congressional elections. All of this was taking place around the state, in the city, in the cities that we were intertwined with, which was War Acres, Bethany, Oklahoma City, this sort of thing. And another thing that we had kind of been, fruitlessly kind of pushing us new ruffians especially was the availability of a cash bar.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I don't, you went to
You cannot
Southern Nazarene.
have
That's a big
that is the devil
no-no.
itself.
Right.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening was Cox Communications had been a member of our chamber for as long as they could remember.
Yeah.
And had only ever paid their membership dues. Never had sponsored anything.
Right.
Never threw out any money for anything. So we crafted a meet and greet for your local legislators and your local mayors and all this. So that would be an hour before the banquet. It would come with a cash bar, but only for an hour. Because we can't possibly let people loose
Of course.
for the whole evening.
Of course.
They may run amok, know. And they sent out an email for sponsors. It was like a $2,000 dessert table sponsorship. And Cox Communications was the first to respond. We'll take that. And I was like, huh.
We need to up our price now.
That's saying something.
Yeah.
That to get a member that's only ever been they've been a member passively forever, and to all of a sudden they're like, we'll take that for $2,000, Johnny.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So it was weather like this.
Yeah.
There was ice on the ground. It was bitterly cold. Every mayor that was invited showed up. The legislators, the gubernatorial candidates, everybody showed up. It was a packed house, and it was the first banquet in quite some time where we had actually made money. So then some things happened on the board, respectfully amongst some of the board members who were presidents of other faith-based universities that were like, look, if this is the direction we're going in, our students can't even work at Chili's because Chili's has, beer and that sort of thing. I can't in good faith ask this of my students and then be a part of the directors of this particular type of move. So that opened up 2 slots on the exec committee. And with the hot off the success of the annual banquet, I slid into the spot of secretary.
Okay.
Which, I mean, being the secretary, part of your role is to know the rules, take minutes, all this kind of stuff. So I had to take a crash course in, the rules of order and, all of this. And once you're on the exec committee, it's just a matter of time.
Right.
That sort of thing. I don't like to, claim success on something that was already headed that way. However, it shook out the way it shook out, right?
Yeah.
And the end of my chairmanship was the first year, and I don't know when, that the Northwest Chamber of Commerce finished a year out in the red. Or in the black,
awesome.
not in the red.
Yeah, making money.
Making money, yes. So I felt pretty good about that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what does that do for someone that is going into facilitation and eventual leadership. And I think Shannon told you this. I think one of the greatest gifts that I've ever been given is that I'm most often underestimated the minute I come in the room.
Yeah. The first line of the text that she sent me this morning when I told her I was interviewing you, he's great, but not what you think when you see him. That is the first line after, hey, like that's...
I will never forget. So I was invited, the first time I was invited to the annual, what they called at that time, Academy Planning Session with Keune, North America. I was in a room basically surrounded by my company heroes, right? Like people I looked up to the entire time I'd been there. And one guy in particular, at that time, I was incredibly intimidated by. He had been on The Real World. He'd been on like 90210 as a hairdresser. Blah blah blah. He had done celebrities' hair. He was from LA, which at that time I was still like completely mystified by anybody from Los Angeles. And he was a part of the planning committee, so to speak. And I walk in and I sit down and I'm like, I don't even know why I'm sitting here. Like these people are for sure.
Like I'm
in the deep end of the pool now.
Right.
And I sat and I listened and I listened and I listened. And somewhere around day 2, I decided to say something, finally. And he kind of looked at me across the table and he was like, he just kind of looked at me. I was like, great. Well, now I'm in the deep end of the pool with an ankle weight on.
Yeah. Now they definitely know who I am.
And he literally said, months, maybe even a year or so later, he was like, you are not what your exterior advertises. I was like, well, 4 years in politics helped that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And because I really, when in the Chamber of Commerce, I really got to hone that skill of just listening.
Yeah.
And watching how people do things. I learned a while back that, and this is kind of germane, but I learned a while back that at age 75, Anthony Hopkins was diagnosed with autism his whole life. And that is what allowed him to observe people at their most minute detail. All right? And not that I have autism or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. But that I'm a fan of that kind of observation. Like literally like what causes someone to look to the left or the right? How does this affect that person? That kind of thing.
It's a real skill to have, right?
Especially when if you want to talk about Sir Anthony Hopkins, absolutely.
Yeah.
And not that I pretend to be any kind of, or portend to be in any way like that, but I do kind of like to look at myself like that's how I look at people.
Right.
And it works. I mean, it's, I had a situation a couple of years ago. I was working with a young man, very punk rock dude. He's very, very rock and roll. And we had a rough day. Some things happened during his segment of the program that didn't go his way, and it was a rough day for him, And we were debriefing at the end of the day, and I was trying to work with him a little bit, and it took me it was about 20 minutes in, and I was like, this is still too close to him, and I'm at this point trying to back out of it. Like, we'll talk about this tomorrow.
Yeah.
Sleep on this, sit in it for a minute, that sort of thing. But before that happened, what the big cue was that we were talking open chest to open chest like this, you know. And suddenly he turns and is now got his shoulder to me. Yeah. Like he's minimized his body. I'm like, he's ready to fight. Like he's ready to fight.
Right.
And I thought that we were, that I was being very calm, like trying to, get him through this. And all of a sudden he turns to the side and I'm like, all right, man, let's go ahead and break for the evening, that sort of thing. And without having, that kind of knowledge or anything like that, where would that have ended up?
Oh, yeah. Serious.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so body language is very important. I look, and being able to sit across the table from 12 other grown people that I know don't like me, but they all know they have to sit and listen to me for at least 60 minutes.
Yeah.
Helps you to be able to read the room, so to speak, but on a little bit more of a finite type of level. So that, to me, that was and it was my first ever public speaking engagement. I had to stand in front of a room full of people and give, as the incoming chair, I had to give the speech for the outgoing chair.
Sure.
And kind of give my, talk of the town, so to speak, lay of the land kind of perspective. And again, that probably wasn't what they were looking for, but it was 6 minutes of absolute bliss for me. And I think it was for the CEO too. I think he was very pleased at, because when I started, I was, I kind of look like I do now. And when I was giving my speech as incoming chair, it was, suit and tie and, that kind of thing. So
still the hair, though?
Still there?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That is, I'm sure someday I'll cut it off again. But, as long as it's still working, then, and it kind of, it adds that odd element.
Yeah.
Still, I'm still kind of rock and roll, still able to kind of,
There's
carry
a side
that
of
off.
you, right? When they see you in a suit, you're like, okay, he's in a suit, he's the president or he's the chair, or, he's the leader of this chamber, but there's something else that he loves to do.
Right.
And it's rock and roll, or it's something like
it's
that.
Something that, and I, music definitely, I'm not a very well-practiced painter, but I do enjoy painting, that sort of thing. And I do cook a lot. I enjoy that. So a lot of other creative things get mixed in there, as well as, music and film and, that sort of thing.
So when you're with Keune and you're doing all that stuff and you're in the room with all kind of like your heroes and stuff, and they've traveled and done stuff on set, do you then aspire to go on set? And then did you go on set around the country?
I have 2020 I was supposed to go to Japan. In April of 2020 we were set to go to Japan to do a whole almost like a Japanese beauty school tour, but they don't do beauty school there like we do here. It's a whole different world. And but I've been to Canada twice, doing things from stage there, and gotten to do hair shows in LA. I've not done any kind of movie set type hair or anything like that. Not that that wouldn't be something I wouldn't be open to, because that definitely sounds like a good time, that sort of thing. And I think that I have, now at this point in my career, I have the chops where I think I could, successfully navigate that, either in, just skill set or being able to circumnavigate how that works, and that sort of thing. So, and be willing to go to it.
Right. Yeah.
So Keune has allowed me to do a lot of things that I'd always kind of aspired to do. You know, I'd always wanted to be on stage, never having any idea what that entailed, you know. And it's, you know, because I don't, you know, a little bit, you know, I get motion sick real easy. I don't like high places. So roller coasters and Ferris wheels and amusement
Cruises
park rides
and
and cruises and skydiving and that sort of thing is not where I would, you know, that's not how I get that rush, right? But being on stage, that's a whole different thing, because when you come off stage, you're just like, you know, you're walking 10 feet off the floor, because it's a very concentrated amount of time. There are things that have to be done. And there's, you know, all the people and all the energy that comes from that. So yeah, I mean, I have really gotten to do, thanks to, you know, a lot of my heroes within the company that have coached me along the way. The VP of Education and Shows, who has had a very, very instrumental part of my career development over the course of the past couple of years. More or less you know, like, you can do this.
Yeah.
And I kind of expect you to do this, but you can do it. This is not beyond you.
Yeah.
You know, so because that, you know, that can get a little, picturing yourself on stage, if it's not daunting to you in the least, then I almost bet you're not going to do so well.
Right.
You know, because if you don't have some kind of jitters about what's going to happen.
It's good to have a little fear, isn't it?
Right. You know, I mean, so I think that is, and then when you get off stage, all of that, you know, that slight apprehension, and then the energy of the people around you, and then the energy that you generate on stage, you know, that definitely stays with you for at least a couple, 2 or 3 hours, you know.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you know, comes the ever dreaded, what I like to call post-show crash, where you just literally, like, almost like you collapse in the middle of the afternoon and sleep for 4 hours, you know. So, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I've been able to take that.
Yeah,
you know,
that's really cool. I'm sure. I mean, you know, from the comments that mum and dad made as you were growing up, right? I'm sure there was a bunch of times, like, you know, you've been growing your hair out and your dad's making comments, or your mum's like, yeah, it's probably time you should get a job. And then, you know, you get to now, right? And you've been very successful, and just through complete passion and, you know, like the drive to continually learn, right, and perfect the craft.
Right.
Like, that's what keeps you, you know, like, because you don't just keep taking the same class over and over again, like, just because it's fun. You keep doing it to find one thing each time that you may have missed, and you continually learn. And that's a great lesson for people listening. It's like, we should always be learning, regardless of what it is.
Never stop learning. The young man I spoke of earlier that had a rough day, one of my favorite, I make him do this almost every time we do a class together. He tells a story of him and his youngest. He grew up, or he lived in a not so hot part of Chicago. All right. And they were walking through the park, and his child picked up a leaf, and he was like, "Put that down." You know, you don't know what's been on that, you know, and that sort of thing. And he had a moment of clarity at that point, in that she will never look at a leaf, or that leaf, the same way she would have the first time.
Right.
So going into a classroom setting, what we invite people to do is look at this as if you're looking at it for the first time.
Okay.
And I think that is a lesson that we could all bear. You know, approach things like you have not seen it 1,000 times.
Right.
You know, and look at it always look at things with as fresh eyes as you can. I mean, I know that, we get into situations where, we're trying to get through the day and we got to go to the grocery store and we got to get home and our kids are yelling and that sort of thing. But, try to at least once a day look at something differently.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I kind of try to keep myself in check on a lot of things. I mean, we've had a hell of a year in 2020. There's been a lot of things that have come up, that sort of thing. I'm from the South originally, you don't have to be a mathematician,
Right.
So, and really try to look at things freshly. And I know, as lame as this is going to sound, try to put yourself in someone else's place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And learn from that perspective.
Right.
I think learning has so much more to do, so much more than just whatever craft or profession or whatever new thing you're trying to figure out. I think learning is everything. Personally, It's every day. It's, you get in the car and you drive to work. You drive to work the same way every day. But you may see something today you didn't see yesterday. And when you drive home that night, you may look at things differently to see what else you might not have seen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you drive by something like, has that always been there?
Has that been there?
Yeah.
Really?
And it has, and you had no idea. Yeah.
Right.
It happens all too often, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sad thing is people are usually looking at their phones and they're driving, which, please don't do that. Yeah. It is awesome. I'm sure that, looking back on things and through doing a podcast or other interviews that you do get to reflect on the things that you've done and the places you've been, the people that you've met, and through doing hair, it's such a personal experience with whoever you're doing hair for, isn't it?
Right. Oh, absolutely. And that's kind of one of the things, when we talked the others, wrote back and forth the other day. I mean, I 100% understand that in the place I live, I'm not going to meet a whole lot of people like myself.
Yeah.
So you have to, learn how to circumnavigate that. And being a completely different version of success, and being around all those people and sharing their personal experiences and seeing their personal perspectives, even though they may or may not align with my own personal perspectives. I think it kind of helps people. It helps you gain perspective, and try sometimes the best you can to understand where someone's coming from.
Right.
Instead of immediately shutting it down because it doesn't sound like something you want to be engaged in.
Right.
I mean, I think we've all been in a situation periodically or once or twice in our life, maybe more than that, where you're in a conversation that you don't necessarily want to be in.
Yeah.
And I love my clients. I think, and I have a very fruitful career due to a lot of shared patience from one side to from one side of the chair to the other.
Yeah.
But you learn a lot about just people. And some things are mystifying. But yeah, I mean, it is definitely kind of it's a shared experience at that level.
Yeah, because people like, I don't know what it is about going to the hairdressers, but it feels like a safe place to talk sometimes.
Right? I'm gonna give a pretty large shout out to a British friend of mine named Tom Chapman. Tom Chapman is the head of an organization. He's a barber. He's the head of an organization called. He wrote a book called Barber Talk, I believe, and he is the head of Lions Barber Club, and they are a suicide awareness organization in Great Britain, and that is the central focus to his entire organization, is that we do operate one of the safest spaces, non-clinically, that there is. And his organization works to help identify, people that may be in need, certain things and that sort of thing, that need to talk to someone. Obviously suicide prevention is, that's what you're going to encounter. Yeah. But, to kind of go off of what you said, it's an extraordinarily safe place, and it's an extraordinarily personal place to be, is in the hairdresser's chair, the barber's chair, hairdresser's chair, whatever you want to say. So I think to really be successful at that, you have to respect that space. You have to, at that point, it's your chair, it's your salon, but it's your service you're performing on this person, but it's not about you, really. Right. It's about sharing their experience, and sometimes, talking them through an experience. I'll never forget, I had a gentleman in my chair one time. He was getting ready to go through a divorce. And I'm like, look, man, I said, you've been married a long time. I said, ladies see these sorts of things differently than we do, than men do. Yeah. I was like, how long you been married? He's like, I've been married 17 years. I said, well, I can tell you, here's the thing. She is going to be 17 years pissed off. And he kind of looked at me, and he was like, I don't care. I'll do what I want. I'm like, all right, brother, I'm just telling you. Yeah. And he come back about, I'd seen him a couple times, but about 6 months later, he's in my chair again. Several visits before that, but this one particular time, he was like, man, I have to say, he was like, you were right. She was 17 years pissed off. So you have to. So sometimes you are talking people through some of the most difficult times of their life. You know what I mean? You get to share in a lot of their happiness, and you also get to share in a lot of their not so happiness, because some people don't always have that safe space. And I've always tried to promote that, like I may not agree with you politically in Oklahoma, about a 95% chance that's going to be the case. Yeah. Right. My social politics are probably going to be different than yours, but as long as we can both respect those things that are going to be different about one another, then that is what I call a cooperative. Yeah. Right? I mean, that's
we need
really
more of that too, don't we? A lot more of it.
Right. So, I mean, you enter into, when you sit in a hairdresser's chair, you are entering into a cooperative situation. There is a silent agreement amongst the two of us that you have decided that I can adequately perform the task at hand. And I have decided that the share is equitable. Right. And we work off of that, Shannon Rich, the lady that referred me to you in the first place, we spent probably at least 15 years on opposite sides of that. Yeah. Having very impassioned conversations about first one thing and the other. We did talk a lot. Most people are like, you're not supposed to talk about politics and that sort of thing. But for whatever reason, she and I felt safe with one another to really kind of, get down to the dirty on the thing and discuss the actual thing. Not like your party is dumb or whatever, but like, I mean, get down
on the actual context level. Of
right.
Let's
you know,
have a
on why this is or isn't working.
Right, yeah.
And why we should or shouldn't be doing this. And we, you know, great friends, been great friends for over 2 decades now. And so I think, you know, we could all, most people, you know, we could all share a hearty dose of that, really. And just, you know, understand that, you know, hairdressers and people are all people. And at some point, we all have to eat breakfast. Hopefully you're getting to eat breakfast, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah. And that we all have jobs to do, and just really try going back to learning, really trying to understand. You know, I put on my Facebook the other day actually something very much like that, and that was seek to understand, not to be right. Which
for some people is a very hard thing to do.
You know,
isn't it?
And yes, it is.
Like very hard.
I mean, sometimes it can be hard for me to do. Like, so like nobody wants to be wrong.
Sure.
Right. And that's, you know, that's one of the things about facilitation is that you sometimes are faced often with someone doing something that is going to lead them to an undesired result. Mm-hmm. The layperson would say that they're doing something wrong.
All right.
Right? So you have to figure out how to guide them from the exercise that they are doing that is going to give them ultimately the unintended result, and guide them into getting the result they intended.
Through their own discovery.
That is facilitation.
Yeah.
And that is, you know, it's Sam Villa is one of our largest industry icons.
Okay.
I mean, great. He's from stage, education, product brands, all this. And he said something that really resonated in one of his last interviews with me, and that is, facilitation is not so much the information you present, but the questions you ask.
Yeah.
So, and that he said that was one of his greatest learning moments, was not to force upon someone information, but to ask them questions to guide them to the information you want to give them.
Yeah. That's a very hard skill to learn.
That's tremendously difficult.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you always want to ask yes questions.
Well,
right?
and if you know the answer too, right? As a teacher, you're just like, the answer is this.
You want to give it to them.
Or a parent or whatever it is with their kids. You're like, hey, this is it. Just do it. Do your homework. It's done. Leave me alone. Right?
Exactly. And you want them so much to, like, that's a part of being in education and facilitation and all that. You want them so badly to get the right answer. You know, you want them to be able to do this properly and to be able to expand upon that. However, if they don't own it, you've just given them a fish.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's okay for today.
Right. Yeah.
But what are you going to do with it tomorrow? You know what I mean? They have nothing to build upon because they did not get that themselves.
Yeah.
So, that's really what education is for adult learning, is guiding people to their own self-discovery.
Yeah. So I'll finish with this. What's next? I mean, you know, you're doing a lot of online learning. You're doing a lot of, you know, Zoom stuff, I'm sure, and conferences online, which is totally different to where you're at this time last year. But, you know, what kind of is in store for you this year? And then I guess where would you like to take stuff in the future?
You know, the future, you know, the vice president of shows and education, always, she asks me that periodically, because I'll ask her, and she's a much more masterful facilitator than I am. And I'll ask her, like, where do you see me going next? And she's like, I don't know. Where do you see you going next? And I'm like, well, I don't know.
That's why I'm asking you the question.
Right. So I always respond to her question of my question with, I want to go as far as I can. Now, does that mean geographically? Yes. Does that mean in my particular skill set? Yes. Mm-hmm. Does that mean as a facilitator? Yes. So I think for 2021 and maybe into 2022, my goal would be to start preparing for what we refer to as a NAHA award, or entering that deep into the pool, which it's an editorial type situation.
Okay.
You're doing editorial hair. It's kind of like the Grammys of the hair industry.
Sure.
All right. And you enter, you have an entry, it's judged and, that sort of thing. So that's something that I would like to do. And, going into 2021, 2022, I hope to at some point towards the end of the year put my foot back on an airplane. Learning to fly, so to speak, was definitely a learned skill for me because I absolutely hated flying.
Yeah, I'm sure. And that flight to Japan would have been...
Yeah, there was a lot of mental preparation that I was having to go through for that, because that's 15 hours up in the air. And I'd never been in the air that long before. So yeah, I would like to see a lot more of the world, post-COVID. I would like to hopefully get back in front of a room full of people by somewhere in late 2021, early 2022, when it's safe to do so, obviously. And just see where this magic carpet ride of a career can take me.
Yeah.
It's been a wonderful, wonderful ride thus far. I believe it is far from over. And I most certainly enjoyed the ascent, for sure, and the continual ascension of that. So, and to me, it's, obviously I enjoy a slightly different brand of success because, my success is not measured by the car that sits in the driveway, though I enjoy a decent car. Shannon and I had this conversation quite often in that I enjoy the time.
Yeah.
I believe that people are usually quite time impoverished. And I enjoy having the time, being able to take the time and really, really, enjoy what I've been given and, or what I've earned, whatever, how you want to look at that. I think it's all a gift, really, to be honest. So, but yeah, that's, I think that's where I'm headed, is to, really get that first NAHA experience under my belt, continue to hone my facilitation skill set, continue to work on my, hairdressing skill set, continue to work on my being a human, that sort of thing.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, mate.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. And I know there's a lot more to the story. And I'm sure hopefully we'll get to do this again. Hopefully after you win the first NAHA, which would be amazing. But yeah, for everyone listening, how can they kind of reach out, follow you on Instagram or whatever it is? And all the
my Instagram is at James_Helton2016. You can look up James Helton on Facebook, and I'm at Sola Suites over here off North May Avenue. That's where I work out of. So just reach out for sure on Instagram anytime, on Facebook anytime, and follow me on there. I post hair things. I post a lot of hair things. I do post the occasional food or barbecue pictures or videos that I've done.
Like to grill, like to barbecue.
Oh yeah. I love barbecue. I love just the aspect of how that all comes together, and that sort of thing. And I mean, clearly, I like to eat. So,
what is the all right? Let you go with this one. What's the best barbecue in Oklahoma City then, or I guess within driving range of Oklahoma Metro that you would go to?
I have a few favorites, and I'm a big fan of George's Happy Hog over off of Culverson, over off Lincoln Boulevard. It's like 13th and Culverson, I think. I love that place. It really is very reminiscent to Southern barbecue.
Okay.
All right, not so much Texas barbecue. Yeah. I like Iron Star barbecue just a lot because of the idea of it. I mean, I love the people that own. You know, the good egg people are literally good eggs in every way, shape, and form. And I love. There's a place in Tulsa called Burn Co.
Okay.
And they have some of the best ribs and, that sort of thing. I'm a ribs guy.
Yeah.
To me, the quality of your barbecue is judged strictly on the quality of your ribs, in my book. And Burn Co. has some delicious ribs and some of the best potato salad. It's hot potato salad, and it's smoked potato salad.
Yeah.
So those are my three big faves around Oklahoma City and Tulsa,
Awesome.
Driving distance.
Yeah. Well, mate, again, thanks for coming down.
Thanks for having me, man. This has been a good time.
Yeah. Thanks for Shannon for putting us together. And everyone listening, I'll post all the links down to James's stuff. You can go follow him on social media and get in touch. We'll catch you next episode. Cheers. This podcast was presented by the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, who've been telling Oklahoma's story through its people since 1927. Follow them online at oklahomahof.com and definitely on Instagram at oklahomahof. Catch you next episode. Cheers.
Thank you for listening. We are inspired by those around us and hope that you are too. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review so we can keep telling your stories. For more great Oklahoma content, follow This Is Oklahoma on Facebook and Instagram.